He rescued a behemothic Apache woman from the river. A budding day, her ancestor came with an unexpected reward. The baptize was deeper than it looked. By the time Boone Carter realized article was wrong, the current had already claimed what appeared to be a massive figure struggling adjoin the rapids. Best men would acquire kept riding. Best men hadn't seen what he'd apparent in those desperate movements. The deliberate, calculated strikes of addition who knew how to fight, alike adjoin drowning. She stood nearly 6, anxiety alpine aback he finally dragged her to shore. Baptize streaming from buckskin that seemed to acquire been crafted for addition, of abnormal admeasurement and strength. Her eyes captivated a accurateness that made him footfall aback instinctively. This wasn't aloof any woman. The intricate bead assignment on her clothing, the way she carried herself alike while coughing up river water, aggregate about her suggested importance, but she battened no English. And aback she looked at him. There was article in her expression that acquainted beneath like acknowledgment, and more like evaluation. She abolished into the wilderness afore dawn. Abrogation, only wet isle and a distinct eagle feather beside his bedroll. Boone assumed he'd never see her again. The assumption lasted absolutely 18 hours. When the complete of abutting horses reached his affected the abutting evening, Boone counted at atomic a dozen riders. They confused with the conduct of warriors. But there was article August about their formation. At their arch rode a man whose attendance seemed to command the very air about him. Older, bearing scars that told stories, cutting regalia that baton of leadership. The man's eyes found Boone. Anon aback he spoke. His English was perfect, measured, and carried weight that fabricated the surrounding silence feel heavy. "You pulled my daughter from the water." It wasn't a question. Somehow this man already knew everything. But the way he said daughter made Boone's chest tighten, not aloof any daughter. And the way the added warriors watched him adapted this wasn't just any chief. "I've arise to altercate your reward." The babble accolade afraid in the air like smoke from a resting fire. But there was article in the chief's accent that suggested this babble was about far added than gratitude. Article that would change aggregate Boone anticipation he knew about his aloof activity on the frontier. What he didn't apperceive was that his simple act of adventuresomeness had set in motion contest that would challenge everything he believed about honor, destiny, and what it absolutely meant to save someone's life. The morning sun cast long caliginosity above the bouldered terrain when Boone Carter Aboriginal heard the sound that would change his activity forever. It wasn't the accustomed brook of covering or snort of his horse that bankrupt the wilderness. Silence. It was something else entirely. The adroit aqueous that didn't accord in these parts. He had been afterward the river for 3 days, keeping to the aerial arena area the view connected for afar in every direction. The baptize beneath ran fast and deep, bloated from contempo mountain storms that had angry, affable streams into torrent. Best travelers avoided this alley entirely, preferring the longer but safer paths through the valleys. The aqueous grew louder as he approached the river's edge. Through the morning mist, he could accomplish out a figure in the water. Addition. Angry against the accustomed with powerful, deliberate strokes. But article was wrong. The person was below ground, actuality swept downstream adjoin an alternation of jagged rocks that jutted from the riverbed like broken teeth. Boone dismounted quickly, his boots, a ward acquirement on the slippery bank. The amount in the water was above than he had expected, moving with the controlled agony of someone who knew how to swim, but was being afflicted by the river's raw power. The accustomed was relentless, pulling the disturbing anatomy adjoin the rocks with anniversary accidental second. Without hesitation, he plunged into the icy water. The algid hit him like a physical blow, but he pushed forward, fighting his way through the churning rapids. The person advanced of him was a woman, he realized, but clashing any woman he had encountered in his years on the frontier. She was tall, powerfully built, with connected atramentous beard that streamed abaft her like a banderole in the current. Her buckskin accoutrement was elaborately busy with beadwork that caught the morning ablaze alike while submerged. The adroitness was extraordinary, suggesting this was no ordinary traveler, but there was no time to admiration about her identity. The rocks were accepting closer, and her strength was acutely failing. Boone accomplished her just as her arch went beneath for the third time. His arm apprenticed about her waist, and he was afraid by her solid weight and the beef he acquainted beneath the wet leather. She didn't agitation at his touch, didn't action him as abounding, drowning people did. Instead, she seemed to assess him alike while disturbing for air. Her aphotic eyes affair his with an intelligence that was both angry and calculating. Together, they fought their way adjoin shore, the woman contributing what backbone she had larboard to their escape from the river's grip. Aback, they finally burst on the bouldered bank, both asthmatic for breath. Boone found himself attractive at addition who commanded respect, alike while assimilation wet and vulnerable. She advised him with those penetrating eyes. And for a moment, he felt like he was the one actuality rescued rather than the one who had done the rescuing. But as she stood to her full impressive height, campanology baptized from her connected hair, Boone accomplished that saving her activity ability acquire, been the accessible part. The adamantine allotment was compassionate why someone like her had been abandoned in such dangerous baptize in the aboriginal place. The woman's blackout was added abashing than any words could acquire been. She stood on the riverbank, baptize, still decrepit from her buckskin dress, and admired Boone with an announcement that seemed to weigh and add measurement aggregate about him. When she assuredly spoke, it was in a language he didn't recognize, admitting the tone suggested neither acknowledgement nor hostility, article added circuitous that he couldn't decipher. Boone aloft his hands in a peaceful gesture, pointing to himself. "Boone," he said simply. "Boone Carter." She adjusted her arch slightly, considering this information. Afresh, she placed a duke on her chest and bat in a single babble that articulate like flowing water itself. Ayana. The academism of the addition acquainted aberrant, acclimatized that he had aloof pulled her from a raging river. But Boone sensed that with this woman, every action agitated weight. She moved with the controlled adroitness of someone acclimatized to command, and despite her contempo ordeal, there was nothing defeated about her posture. Ayana absolved to area, his horse stood patiently, belief the beastly with the same acute analysis she had given Boone. She ran her duke forth the horse's flank, and the beastly responded to her touch with accessible approval. Alike his horse, about alert of strangers, seemed to acquire something authoritative in her presence. Aback, she turned aback to Boone. She gestured downstream, afresh befuddled her arch with unmistakable firmness. The bulletin was clear. Whatever had brought her to that dangerous amplitude of river, she had no intention of continuing in that direction. Boone Acicular adjoined his small camp in the distance, afresh to the sky, indicating the abutting evening. Ayana followed his boring, and nodded once. A distinct absolute movement that suggested she was authoritative, a calculated decision rather than artlessly accepting help. At his camp, she confused with the efficiency of addition adequate in the wilderness. She helped him accumulate wood for the blaze after actuality asked, her movements absolute and economical, but she additionally kept accidental adjoin the hills, in the distance, as if expecting something or addition to appear. As the sun began to set, casting connected shadows across their acting shelter, Boone offered her broiled meat from his supplies. She accustomed it with a nod that ability acquire, been gratitude. Though her announcement remained guarded, they ate in affable silence, the crackling blaze the abandoned complete between them. But aback abounding Atramentus fell. Ayana became restless. She stood frequently, scanning the border with the alertness of addition who knew how to apprehend danger in the landscape. Her duke occasionally moved to her side. Area Boone noticed the outline of a knife handle beneath her buckskin dress. Finally, she approached him and batten afresh in her own language, this time with unmistakable urgency. She articular to herself, afresh to the atramentus beyond their fire, and befuddled her head emphatically. Afresh she acicular to him, and fabricated a action that acutely meant stay or wait. Afore Boone could respond, she had aggregate her still damp belongings and stepped into the shadows beyond the fire's light. He heard her movements for a few moments, then nothing but the accustomed sounds of the night wilderness. Back. Morning came. She was gone. The abandoned affirmation of her presence was a set of aisle leading away from affected and a distinct eagle feather placed advisedly beside his bedroll. A calamus that seemed far too perfect and placed too absolutely to be coincidental. As Boone advised the feather in the morning light, he couldn't agitate the activity that his encounter with Ayanna had been something more than a simple rescue. But what that something ability be remained as mysterious as the woman herself. Boone spent the morning belief Ayanna's footprints, aggravating to acquire the story they told. The advance led north into bouldered area that would challenge even. An accomplished tracker, but they were deliberate, purposeful. This wasn't someone beat in panic. This was someone who knew absolutely area she was going. He tucked the Hawkeye calamus into his saddlebag and connected his own journey westward, but activate himself constantly. Accidental adjoin the Northern Hills area, her isle had disappeared. The appointment had larbored him with more questions. Then answers and questions had a way of bistro at a man during long hours in the saddle. By midday, the sun was assault bottomward mercilessly, and Boone decided to draft in the adumbration of a cluster of cottonwood copse abreast the river. He was blockage his horse's shoes when he heard them. The unmistakable sound of assorted horses approaching from the east. The riders appeared as dark shapes adjoined the ablaze horizon, moving with aggressive precision. As they drew closer, Boone counted 12 mounted figures, all cutting the practical clothing of bodies who alive their entire lives outdoors. But there was something ceremonial about their formation, something that adapted this wasn't a casual convoying or hunting party, the man leading them allowable absorption even from a distance. He sat his horse with the affectionate of accustomed ascendancy that couldn't be abstruse or faked. And as the group approached Boone's comatose spot, that ascendancy became alike, more apparent. He was earlier than the other riders, conceivably 50 winters, with silver threading through beard that was still predominantly black. Scars apparent his face and hands, not accidental wounds, but the advised marks of addition who had survived abounding battles. His accoutrement was both activated and ceremonial, decorated with symbols that batten of leadership and respect, acceptable through accomplishment rather than birth. Aback the accumulation chock-full 20 FT from Boone's position, the leader dismounted with aqueous grace. His dark eyes took in every detail of Boone's camp, his horse, his weapons, and, finally, Boone himself. The analysis felt thorough and professional, like being evaluated by addition who could apprehend a man's appearance in the way he cared for his equipment. "You pulled my daughter from the water," the man said in English. That was not abandoned, fluent, but carried the accent of addition, who had learned it able-bodied abundant to use it as a tool of diplomacy. The account hit Boone like a concrete blow, not because it was threatening, but because it revealed how abundant this man already knew. He hadn't asked if Boone had a parent a woman or if he had been abreast the river. He knew absolutely what had happened, probably down to the aboriginal detail. "Your daughter," Boone managed. Admitting the words acquainted inadequate, the man stepped closer and Boone could see that his eyes held the aforementioned able acuteness he had noticed in Ayanna. "Her name is Ayanna," she told me about the man who risked his activity for a stranger. A dozen questions formed in Boone's mind, but the leader connected afore he could voice any of them. "I am Nastas," he said, and the way he bat in his own name suggested it agitated weight in these parts. "Chief of our bodies and you, Boone Carter, have done article that requires acknowledgement." The word acknowledgement afraid in the air, with implications that Boone couldn't yet understand. But article in Nasta's tone adapted this babble was about to become far added significant than a simple announcement of parental gratitude. Nastas gestured for Boone to sit, transforming what could acquire been an alarming battle into something added like an academic meeting. The added warriors remained army but relaxed their postures slightly, though Boone noticed they maintained positions that would acquiesce them to acknowledge quickly if needed. "My babe was not in that river by accident," Nastas began, settling, himself cross-legged on the ground with the affluence of Addition who had conducted important business in similar circumstances endless times. She was there because of duty, because of honor, because sometimes the best dangerous path is the abandoned aisle that leads where we charge to go. Boone activated himself, leaning advanced, admitting his caution. Every babble Nasta Batten seemed to carry layers of meaning, and he sensed that understanding those layers' ability be crucial to compassionate why 12 armed warriors had tracked him down. 3 days ago, our scouts brought babble of strangers effective through our territory. Nastas continued, men who showed no respect for the land, who took what they pleased and larbored abolition in their wake. My babe volunteered to cross the river and apprentice their true intentions. The pieces began falling into abode in Boone's mind. Ayanna hadn't been bridged the river for amusement or convenience. She had been on a reconnaissance mission that had nearly cost her life. The accustomed was stronger than expected, Nasta said, and for the first time, Boone heard article that might acquire been vulnerability in his voice. She is strong, skilled, but the river shows benevolence to no one. Boone nodded, canonizing how even Ayanna's accessible backbone had been no match for the churning water. She fought it well. But, addition few minutes. Yes, Nasta said simply. Addition few minutes and my bodies would acquire absent not aloof a daughter, but our abutting leader. The weight of that adumbration acclimatized over Boone like a abundant blanket. He hadn't just pulled a woman from the river. He had adored the approaching arch of what was obviously a cogent tribe. This creates what my bodies alarm a debt of balance, Nastas explained. Aback, someone saves the activity of a leader, especially when that actuality risks their own activity in the process. The debt cannot be repaid with simple gratitude. One of the mounted warriors said article in their language, and Nastas nodded, before turning aback to Boone. My men admonish me that you could acquire connected your journey. Abounding would have. The river was dangerous, the after effect uncertain, but you chose accident over safety. Assignment to a stranger over assignment. To yourself. Boone shifted uncomfortably. Any adapted person would acquire done the same. No, Nasta said firmly. Abounding bodies allege of what they would do. Few absolutely do it aback the moment comes, and beneath still do it for someone who is acutely not of their own people. The arch stood and absolved to his horse retrieving article from his saddlebags. Aback he returned. He captivated a bundle captivated in bendable leather. This is why I acquire come, he said, his voice taking on an academic accent that fabricated even his warriors a line in their saddles. To altercate your reward, Boone's pulse quickened. The way Nastas spoke the babble accolade adapted, this wasn't going to be a simple allowance of food or safe access through their territory. But first, Nastas continued, you must understand that what I am about to offer will change your activity completely. Once offered, it cannot be taken back. Once accepted, it cannot be undone. The silence that followed was burst abandoned by the complete of horses alive and the distant babble of the river where everything had started. Nastas carefully unwrapped the covering bundle, revealing an intricately crafted brand that caught the afternoon sunlight. The metalwork was clashing annihilation Boone had seen. Not the asperous argent ornaments accustomed to frontier trading posts, but something that batten of age-old adroitness and deep cultural significance. "This medallion has been in my ancestors for 7 generations," Nastas explained, holding it, so Boone could see the detailed engravings that covered its surface. "It is acclimatized, abandoned to those who have accurate themselves aces of our deepest assurance and respect." Boone studied the medallion, acquainted that while beautiful, it was acutely not the complete accolade Nastas had mentioned. The chief's academic accent and the serious expressions of his warriors suggested something far added cogent was coming. But the brand is abandoned, a symbol. Nastas continued, rewrapping it carefully. The accurate accolade is what it represents. Acceptance into our association as a bounding affiliate with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. The words hit Boone with abrupt force. In all his years on the frontier, effective from place to abode after abiding ties, he had never advised the possibility of absolutely acceptance somewhere. The idea was both ambrosial and terrifying. "You would acquire acreage to alarm your own," Nastas explained. "Protection of the tribe. A voice in our councils," and he paused, glancing adjoin his warriors before continuing. "If you prove yourself worthy over time, the achievability of marriage to addition of adapted standing." Boone's apperception anon went to Ayanna, remembering her able eyes and commanding presence. The association in Nastas's words seemed clear, though nothing was actuality declared directly. But Nastas continued, his accent acceptable more serious. "Accepting this action means leaving your old activity abaft completely. You would alive as we live, follow our ways, acquire our laws. There would be no going aback to the aloof actuality you have known." One of the warriors spoke briefly in their language, and Nastas nodded. "My men admonish me that we do not make this action lightly. In 20 years of leadership I connected it only twice before, both times to men who had saved the lives of affiliated associates under circumstances that accustomed their character above question." Boone found himself staring at the wrapped medallion, aggravating to action what was being offered. A home, a family, a people to accord to, aggregate his rootless actuality had lacked. "You don't have to acknowledgment immediately," Nasta said. Though his accent adapted, this was not an action that could abide open indefinitely. "But you should apperceive that our scouts address added of those strangers entering our territory, the ones my babe was investigating when she about drowned. Their intentions toward our bodies are unclear, but their actions advance they may affectation a threat." The association was obvious. Abutting the tribe would beggarly accepting not aloof the benefits of membership, but additionally the dangers that came with it. "If you accept our offer," Nastas continued, "you would be accustomed to angle with us adjoin any threats to our people. Your activity would become apprentice to ours in agency that go far deeper than simple accord or alliance." Boone looked up to accommodate Nastas's steady gaze, realizing that his answer to this catechism would actuate not just his own future, but possibly the futures of anybody present. The weight of accommodation acclimatized heavily on Boone's shoulders as he advised Nastas's offer. Aggregate about his activity had been accurate by movement, by the freedom to acquire his own administration without considering the needs or expectations of others. The abstraction of abiding commitment felt both adopted and strangely appealing. "May I ask," Boone said carefully, "what happened to the 2 men who accustomed this action before?" Nasta's expression grew solemn. The aboriginal proved himself aces in all ways. He became one of our best admired warriors and lived amid us for 30 years until age claimed him. His accoutrements still backpack on his bequest oral the tribe. He paused before continuing. The additional. The second discovered that the activity of shared responsibility was not what he had expected. After 2 years, he chose to leave. We beggared as friends, but he could never return. The bluntness of the answer addled Boone as significant. Nostos wasn't aggravating to adumbrate the challenges or acrylic an unrealistic picture of what associates in the tribe would mean. "The strangers you mentioned," Boone said. "How austere is the threat they represent?" One of the warriors leaned advanced in his saddle and spoke rapidly to Nostos, who listened intently before translating. "Grey Wolf says they have been demography horses without permission, hunting in areas angelic to our bodies and assuming boldness to the land itself. Yesterday, they austere a section of backwoods artlessly to bright their path." The accidental abolition described bothered, Boone added, than outright hostility ability have. Men who showed such apathy for the acreage and its inhabitants were capricious and potentially alarming to anybody in the area. "How abounding of them are there?" Boone asked. "Our scouts' calculation 15. "Maybe 20, Nostos replied. "Well armed but poorly organized. They move like men who are used to demography what they appetite without consequence." Boone activated himself thinking about Ayanna, canonizing her alertness around the bivouac and the way she had scanned the border as if expecting trouble. If she had been investigating these men aback the river about claimed her life, their blackmail to the association was clearly actuality taken seriously. "If I were to acquire your offer," Boone said slowly, "would I be accustomed to advice accord with these strangers?" "You would be expected to angle with your people," Nostos replied, "as we would angle with you. That is what it agency to belong somewhere." The artlessness of the statement agitated abstruse weight. Boone had spent years alienated absolutely this kind of entanglement, preferring the clean ability of answering abandoned to himself. But he was alpha to realize that ability and abreast weren't the aforementioned thing, and that one could become a bastille as circumscribed as any jail. "I would charge to apperceive added about your ways," Boone said. "Your laws, your customs. I wouldn't appetite to bring dishonor to your bodies through ignorance." Article that ability have been approval flickered in Nostos's eyes. "Ayanna has volunteered to serve as your guide. If you accept, she knows our customs bigger than anyone, and she has already declared that your appearance has been accurate through your actions." The mention of Ayanna, beatific and unexpected warmth through Boone's chest. The thought of acquirements. From her, of seeing that intelligent acuteness activated to teaching rather than evaluation, was more ambrosial than he cared to admit. "How connected do I acquire to decide?" Boone asked. "The sun will set in 4 hours, Nostos replied. "By the time it rises again, you charge accord me your answer." The deadline was after-peace than Boone had expected, but conceivably that was appropriate. Some decisions were best made apprenticed afore agnosticism could cloud judgment or abhorrence could affected courage. As the afternoon wore on, Nostos and his warriors fabricated affected nearby, giving Boone space to exceed his accommodation. While making it bright, they would delay for his answer. The adjacency acquainted respectful rather than threatening, but it also ensured there would be no alienated the choice that lay afore him. Boone found himself walking to the bank where he had aboriginal pulled Ayanna from the churning water. The accustomed still ran fast and deep, aloof to the human dramas that played out forth its shores. Standing there, he approved to brainstorm what his activity ability attending like if he accepted Nostos's offer. The aloof existence he had accustomed. For years, Abac seemed less like abandon and added like emptiness. He anticipation about the countless nights he had fabricated affected alone with abandoned his horse for aggregation and no one to affliction whether he lived or died. The ability he had admired so highly was alpha to feel like an anatomy of exile. But accepting Nostos' action would mean added than aloof gaining companionship. It would mean responsibility for the abundance of others, accord in decisions that affected an absolute community, and the possibility of battle with the strangers, who were aggressive the tribe's territory. As if summoned by his thoughts, the complete of approaching footsteps fabricated him turn. Ayana emerged from the trees, effective with the same silent adroitness he remembered from their brief time together. She had changed from her water-damaged buckskin into clothing that was both activated and ceremonial, busy with beanwork that seemed to acquaint belief and patterns he couldn't read. "My ancestor says you are because his offer," she said in English that was absolute but clear. "I am," Boone replied, "though I'm not sure I'm the appropriate actuality for what he has in mind." Ayana stepped closer, studying him with those biting eyes. "When you pulled me from the river, did you think about whether you were the right person for that task?" The question caught him off guard. "No," I aloof acted. "Exactly," she said. "You saw addition in danger and responded after calculating. The accident to yourself or apprehensive if you were able to help. That is why my father believes you would fit able-bodied among our people." She gestured, adjoin the river. "Our community advise that when someone saves a life, they become responsible for that activity in some way. But they additionally advise that the saved person becomes amenable for the life of their rescuer." Boone acquainted his pulse quicken at the implications of her words. "What does that beggarly exactly?" "It means," Ayana said, "dispatch afterpiece until he could aroma the academician and candied grass in her hair, that if you accompany our tribe, you would not be abandoned in acquirements our ways. I would be apprenticed by account to help you succeed." The amour in her voice suggested that this bounden would not feel like accountability to either of them, the strangers my ancestor mentioned. Boone said, "How alarming are they really?" Ayana's announcement grew serious. "Dangerous abundant that our scouts report they are effective afterpiece to our main village. Alarming abundant that our warriors are advancing for the possibility of conflict. If you join us, you would be abutting us. At a time when your ability be tested quickly." She paused, afresh added softly. "But additionally, at a time aback an extra warrior, abnormally one whose courage has already been proven, would be most valuable to our people." The sun was beginning to bore adjoin the horizon, and Boone knew his time for accommodation was running short. As the sun affected the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Boone fabricated his way back to area Nastas waited, by the fire. The chief looked up as he approached, his weathered face absolute annihilation of his thoughts or expectations. "I acquire an answer," Boone said, clearing himself across from Nastas. The warriors gathered about the blaze fell silent, and alike Ayana, who had followed him from the riverbank, seemed to authority her breath. "I acquire your offer," Boone continued, activity the weight of the words as he battened them, "but I appetite. You two have perceived that I've never belonged anywhere before. I may not be acceptable at it at first." A smile advanced across Nasta's face, the aboriginal absolutely warm expression Boone had apparent from him. The best associates of any association are often those who acquire to accord rather than those who are built into it. The chief reached for the covering array and carefully unwrapped the brand once more. "This has been cat and mouse for you since the moment you entered that river," he said, assent and stepping forward. As Nastas placed the medallion around Boone's neck, the metal acquainted warm against his chest, as if it had absorbed the calefaction from the fire. The weight of it was abundant, but not uncomfortable, a tangible admonition of the charge he had aloof made. "Welcome to our people." Boone Carter Nasta said formally, "From this day forward, your abundance is our welfare. Your struggles, our struggles, your victories are victories." The warriors about the blaze accurate their approval in their own language, and Boone was afraid by how abundant their acceptance meant to him. But it was Ayana's smile that absolutely broiled him, bright and 18-carat in the blaze light. "Now," Nastas continued, his accent becoming more businesslike, "we acquire immediate matters to appear to. The strangers I mentioned acquire confused afterpiece to our territory. Tomorrow, We charge accord with them afore they affectation a greater threat to our people." Boone nodded, understanding that his aboriginal analysis as a member of the association would arise sooner than expected. "What do you charge me to do? Your ability of how such men think will be valuable," Nastas replied. "Many of our warriors acquire fought other tribes, but few acquire dealt with the kind of men who abort for amusement rather than purpose." Over the abutting hour, as plans were fabricated and strategies discussed, Boone activate himself contributing. Account and allurement questions that were accustomed with account and consideration. For the aboriginal time in his adult life, he was allotment of something larger than himself. As the blaze died down and the accumulation able to rest, Ayanna approached him one final time. "My father's action included the possibility of marriage," she said quietly, her directness both hasty and refreshing, "but that is the best that would be ours to make. In time, if we find we clothing anniversary other," Boone met her gaze steadily. "I'd like that adventitious to find out." She nodded once, satisfied. "Then we will see what the approaching brings." The abutting morning, as they rode together toward the affiliated Apple area Boone would activate his new life, he realized that the abrupt accolade Nastas had offered was far added admired than gold or land. It was the adventitious to belong somewhere, to be allotment of something meaningful, and conceivably to acquisition the kind of accompaniment that fabricated all of life's struggles worthwhile. The accomplishment in the river had lasted abandoned minutes, but its consequences would appearance the draft of his days. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your awning now to watch another acclaimed account from the frontier area. Adventuresomeness and destiny intertwine in the best abrupt ways. Don't balloon to subscribe and exceed a super babble to advise us accumulate bringing you these accurate stories. Your support means aggregate to us.